Welcome along, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. How safe is your school transport? My name's James Luckhurst from Project Edward, so thanks for joining us. Just to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and we'll post it on the website shortly after the live event finishes. I've got Simon Turner helping me with questions and feedback and comments. Please use the chat function for that. If you have a question, we'll try and get to it, or a comment, and Simon will make sure that I'm made aware of that. But I'm pleased to welcome in alphabetical order our panelists: Geraint Davies from the Fleet Operator Recognition Scheme, or FORS for short, Rob Griffiths from Powys County Council, Jamie Hassell from PACS, the Parliamentary Advisory Council for Transport Safety, and Brian Watts from DriveTech. We'll start by inviting each of our panelists to set the scene, telling us a bit about who they are, what they do, and one or two of the key issues they're concerned about in the field of school transport. Then we'll dive straight in to discuss some of the issues and deal with a pile of questions that will probably keep us here much longer than an hour. So without further ado, we'll crack on. Geraint, the floor is yours for a couple of minutes. Tell us a bit about you, what you do, and the issues that are important to you in this topic.
Good afternoon. My name's Geraint Davies. I'm FORS Director. I've always had an avid interest in the bus and coach sector ever since I was a little boy. I used to go up the bus garage and look at the buses and all that type of thing. You could describe me as a bit of a closet Blakey, as people of a certain age would appreciate that. I also started as a bus fitter, as a technician in United Welsh Coaches in Gorseinon back in the early 90s before I went and did my A-levels. And then I ended up as a Welsh teacher for a little while. But I never strayed too far away from trucks and transport. Went to work at John Raymond Transport, did that for 22 years, and left there in 2 years ago now, and took up this role. But done quite a bit along life's way. I have driven coaches. I have got a PSV, or Category D, I should say, and a TMCBC in passenger, that is, although I've never actually used that in anger because I was already on a freight O license. So I've been in and around the heavy end of trucks, transport, buses and coaches for a long time. My idea of a nice weekend would be looking at some old Plaxtons, or, looking at some old buses or coaches. But sadly, it's not my wife's idea of a nice weekend. So I don't get to do that a great deal. I have in the past been involved in Swansea Bus Museum, as he is a member on the call here today. Always had an interest, but my role of FORS is overarching. One of the main and the core pillar of FORS is road safety, protecting vulnerable road users, but also FORS is open to all modes of transport, anything from a cargo bike up to a mobile crane, but also very much including buses and coaches, noting the distinct differences as well between those two sectors. And to improve road safety in general, and the safety of passengers, and, like we're discussing today, the safety of children.
Thank you very much, Geraint. We'll move to Rob Griffiths. You're welcome, Rob. Tell us about you and what you do.
Hi there, I'm Rob Griffiths. I'm the Road Safety Officer for Powys County Council, one of two. I cover south of been doing the job now for about 18 months. Prior to that, I was a police officer for 30 years, mainly 27 years on traffic. Collision investigation I did, and I did all the tachograph stuff, level 2 and 3. I DGSA for the force at the time, and before I retired, I was the roads policing trainer, doing all the roads policing courses for Dyfed-Powys Police. So I've got a lot of experience on traffic matters, worked with the DVSA for 20 or plus years, roadside doing enforcement and things like that, and school buses was a big part of enforcement at the time. So the job I'm in at the moment now mainly is involved in education, so educating the children to wear their seat belts on the buses and things like that. And one of the problems we're finding at the moment is the lack of discipline and the lack of the children wearing their seatbelts on the school buses. So this is where maybe the road safety officers can liaise with the industry to assist in coming up with a better education early doors when they're young, to instill that mindset. So going forward up into comprehensive school and things like that.
Rob, thank you very much. Jamie Hassel from PAX, tell us what's on your agenda and a couple of things about you too.
Okay, so well, PAX is a transport safety charity, so we cover sort of multiple areas, but we had a manifesto the end of last year, and young driver risk, or sort of GDL, was in that, so it was an area that we had a sort of interest in. But I've got two kids at school. One of them is actually driving. My wife is a teacher and actually is qualified to drive a minibus. And I see the carnage in the car parks at school, and I think to myself, do you know what? If I go to a construction site, we all have to reverse park and do this, and it's all adults and very grown up. Yet in a situation where you've got lots of kids of all ages walking around, it's sort of park how you like, and it's a bit chaotic sort of thing. I'm just thinking something's going to go wrong at some point here, or has already. And actually, how we're sharing best practice and knowledge across industries and stuff. So that's I think why I've been dragged into this. So yeah, more than happy to be part of that.
Oh, thank you, Jamie. Last but not least, Brian Watts from Drive Tech.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, my name is Brian Watts. I'm a strategic account manager for Drive Tech. So we are a specialist driver and road safety training organisation, part of the AA. My particular role is to manage the business relationships with some of our key corporate customers. And over the last few years, I have developed and built a relationship with a not-for-profit organisation whose principal role is to provide minibus transport for schools up and down the country. They have a fleet of 750 minibuses and around 3,000 volunteer drivers. So it's been a fantastic opportunity for us to learn a great deal more about the specific challenges that minibus drivers, and particularly school minibus drivers, face, as opposed to other other forms of transport and other drivers and in other walks of life on the roads. So yeah, my particular interest is in how do we adequately support, given the very particular needs of schools and school minibus drivers. How do we support them in trying to help keep them as safe and supported as possible?
Brian, thank you very much indeed. We now have a load of questions, and some of them may overlap. The topics will vary. I hope they'll be useful for conversation purposes. And let me just remind everybody who's taking part, pop your question or comment into the chat. We have Simon who's looking after it, and to make sure that what you say we will come to and bring to the attention of our panelists during the course of this webinar. So the first question, and since Brian, you were the last to go with the introductions, let's come to you first with this question. What are the most common safety risks associated with school minibus transport, and how can driver training help mitigate them?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so having a look at this, I think it's many and varied, and that there are many different sorts of challenges that are faced by people driving school minibuses. The most common things would come in under the headings of things like complacency, lack of practice, lack of driving experience in general, depending on who the appointed persons are that are traveling, a lack of kind of appreciation and awareness of the challenges involved in driving a minibus with school children on board. There's a point just made about the seatbelts. Is that something that's there's a particular challenge there of a minibus with a lot of young people on it is a challenge all of its own. and sometimes that complacency or that lack of awareness can be a particular challenge and a particular safety risk. So the training is all about, and how we approach that training is all about sort of trying to influence driver behavior, trying to make sure that the driver's thought process is all around safety first, for the particular needs that they're doing, that they're thinking in the terms of their decisions to what they're going to do is about what is the safest option. As opposed to skills training, you could have all the skills in the world as a driver, but if the attitude and behavior isn't right, those skills aren't really going to count for a lot. But the right behavior is going to have a far more positive effect on risk mitigation.
Let's talk about changing behaviour then, and maybe I could come to Geraint on that. In your experience, what are ways of making positive behaviour change in drivers?
It's all about culture and having that culture bottom up, top down, and for people to live and breathe that culture on a day-to-day basis, and to instill that with the drivers, and to take drivers on that journey with you, and being mindful of the fact we could be. My wife actually works in a school as well, and they have a minibus, and my brother runs a sixth form college, and they have minibuses, and he comes to me with various things along the way as well. So I'm mindful that the drivers are a broad church. So you could have somebody that's a Welsh teacher, for example, that happens to drive the minibus. The PE teacher may happen to drive the minibus, but then you could have the homeschool transport, fully fledged Cat D license holders working for a fleet operator. When you look at when you do some market segmentation and you look at the size of fleets, then a lot of fleets tend to be small sub-10 vehicles, particularly in Wales, when you look at operators. So they're not all the large fleet operators. So the same applies for them all. So at what cost do you put safety, really? And it has to be culturally driven, and to reassess and realign drivers' behaviours. And there's many ways you can do that, through training, using telemetry, and so forth.
Rob Griffiths, what would be the sort of gold standard from your point of view in terms of driver training for minibuses?
I think with driver training, it's mainly adhering to the rules, making sure that depending on what type of transport they're doing, whether it be just transporting the children to school in the morning or whether they are taking them to swimming, because they're two different journeys. So, for example, the journey to school in the morning, collecting them from the villages, taking them to the school is not covered on tachographs. It's domestic rules. And obviously, once you start going on the school bus trips to swimming clubs and down to the theatre and things like that, they are now part of EU rules. So it's making these companies need to make sure that, one, some of these people haven't got second jobs, and obviously are not recording it as other work on their driving hours, and also having been properly trained. If they're mixing and matching two different types of driving, it'd be domestic and EU, and having a safety plan as well. So, for example, in our village, the school bus overshot the junction, overshot the bus stop, and rather than go around to the nearest lay-by, turn around, come back, and ensure the safety of the children, just reversed back up the main A40 back into the lay-by, which is just staggering. It's hard, and how drivers need to have that. Yeah, if I miss the bus stop, what do I do? Do I go to the next lay-by, turn around and come back? Do I go to a roundabout? Things like that.
Jamie Hassel, do examples of good practice or complaints come to your desk? Is this an area that's of big importance and interest?
No, I mean, I was just thinking of what we can learn from other things and personal experience. So my wife's a language teacher and has organised trips abroad and stuff like that, and quite often the flights or the ferry crossing times are ridiculous hours. So they're traveling through the night because it's a cheap crossing. And it's that kind of, but what was the risk? You know, we've got a bus driver or a minibus driver to drive at 4 o'clock in the morning to be at a port for, you know, an early morning crossing. Was that it was the cheapest option? Was it the safest option? And was it worth it, sort of thing? So I think how we bring risk assessments into these things as well, because I have to admit, this is not an area I've sort of thought about much in the past, but it's kind of recently, because of the young driver risk and things like that, it's a new area. I'm thinking, oh, you know, have they got that? Is there a drink drive policy at work? Do they bother testing? So, you know, there might be a drink drive policy, but if they're not testing, I don't think teachers have drink problems, should we say, being married to one. But you know, it's one of the things you don't know. And actually, you know, there's a lot of good practice out there, but it's not necessarily shared across different industries. So, you know, we've got a report that says van drivers kill the most people per mile traveled, sort of thing. Now, what I don't know is what type of van driver, or you know, it's probably sort of lorry drivers and stuff like that, where sort of coaches and buses tend to be safer. But what I don't know is it actually more commercial ones are, and it's actually all the school ones that have collisions, and you know, it's good to have that evidence, you know. So I think that's what I'm really interested in, is actually, you know, are we recording this? Do we know what's going on? Are we learning from when something does go wrong to sort of share it with others to say, you know, this happened? You know, all our volunteers are over 60. But actually what we didn't do is check their eyesight, or, you know what I mean? So it's actually trying to work out what the risks are, what's gone wrong in the past, and then how do we learn from that to make sure it doesn't happen again.
We're getting some comments in, so I'm just going to just go through a couple of these and share them with you. So Andrew Curry is making a point about seatbelts. So help us out here. How many adults in the UK are aware that they are legally required to wear seatbelts if fitted on public service buses? And then let's drop down, because he's followed that up with, should bus and coach drivers be made responsible for telling people to wear seatbelts? Rob, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, there's a bit of a distinction between a service bus and a coach. Coaches probably will have seatbelts fitted standard, but some service buses don't have seatbelts at all. So there'd be no requirement to wear it. So a lot of service buses haven't got them. However, once you're over 14 years old, it becomes your responsibility then to wear a seatbelt. So as a bus driver with a school, the drivers with children under 14, it's the driver's responsibility, and he should be telling them to put their seatbelts on and making every effort. Obviously, once they're over 14, then it's the responsibility of the child. Then, in the eyes of the law, they are the ones that can get a ticket for it, not to the driver. However, still got a duty of care with school children and things like that. But yeah, with seatbelts and service buses, you've got to be careful, because service buses, a lot of service buses haven't got them, and coaches have.
Simon Gardner is wondering, I'm sure we're all wondering, inevitably local authorities have to go for cost, but it's cost or safety. And when awarding school contracts, he says he often witnesses some shocking looking vehicles taking children to school. Anyone any thoughts on that? Geraint, maybe.
Yeah, I see this quite a lot in this area. There was a school near to here, and DVSA did a spot check and put a PG9 on a good number of the coaches that were parked in the school lay-by that day. One of them was an S-Mark PG9, and from all my years as a freight operator, I can't say that resonated with me. And you know, why people seem to think it's acceptable to do limbo dancing with rates and go for the lowest possible bidder, irrespective of their OCRS score. I realise OCRS isn't used as a metric for procurement, but it's a good indicator. But if somebody's got a red OCRS, has had multiple PIs, public inquiries, and yet they're still transporting children, that to me is morally wrong. And to pick up on what Jamie said, I have been that parent that goes down to see my my kids off. My wife wanted to ban me from seeing the kids off on holiday, on skiing trips and things like that, because I go down there and I said to my wife, the last one when the boy went skiing, I said, "There's 10 reasons I wouldn't have taken that coach off the yard this morning, and that's taking my son to Austria." And my wife said, "Shut up, we're going to Tenerife tomorrow." But but the whole presentation of the vehicle, spurious tires on it, they weren't the correct tires, M&S tires, didn't have the stickers on it for France, and numerous issues. And I just thought, if that vehicle had, for example, a Force sticker on it, it looked visually correct. And not only that, talking about cost as well, that vehicle had come down from the Midlands to South Wales before it even started its journey, with a feeder driver that had started at 2 a.m. I understand driver's hours and tachographs and how far you can get, and then drive down to Dover and then do a changeover, and then somebody else run down. But that to me just seemed, it just didn't sit well with me. And there's various examples of that. You see it on rail replacement services and so forth. But yeah, doing limbo dancing with rates and getting to the lowest possible rate is at the expense of safety is not correct in my view.
I'm going to share a few more comments. Elizabeth Johnson. Thank you for this, Liz. I was on roads policing until retirement in 2022. 10 years ago, we did school bus checks in partnership with local authority, DVSA, every 6 months or so. When I asked to set this up again, as it had been dropped off due to cutbacks, and was told it was not a police priority, as not high on the collision stats. That's from Liz. Paul Strong, we have been told by our local driving assessors that DVSA, DVLA are cracking down on the grey area around B licensed drivers driving minibus lights, that's under 3.5 tons, with more than 8 passenger seats installed. Section 19 permits require anyone that's paid by the organisation to have a D1 if they drive a vehicle with 9 or more passengers. B licensed drivers can only do so as volunteers. I think we need some help from Brian here. Are schools aware of this? There's lots of acronyms and numbers and getting into detail, but clarify that for us.
It's difficult to have any kind of real kind of strength in knowledge of what schools are or are not aware of, because it's usually down to the individual schools to investigate those requirements and make sure that whatever minibuses they've got in at their disposal, that the people driving them have the correct license entitlement to do so. But Paul is absolutely right. Category B on the license allows someone to drive a minibus with up to a maximum of 8 passenger seats. They would need the category D1 for between 9 and 16 passenger seats. And then beyond that, you're getting into the world of coaches. So yeah, it's difficult to know, but it's something that schools, not only do they need to be careful of have they got the right category of license, it's also when did that person obtain that category, and does it come under the not for hire and reward element of when they got that category. For example, I passed my test before 1988, so I've got it automatically on my license, but I couldn't take up a job driving a minibus of that size unless I then, I think, retrain to make sure that I've got the right level of training to qualify. So there are a number of elements that I don't know how much it is down to each individual school. Have they investigated it thoroughly?
Thank you very much, Brian, and thanks to everybody. I tell you what, we're going to take a slight break from the minibus world, because Jamie Hassel, you showed me a very interesting letter that's used by a school that sets out that school's policy on what's permitted and what's not when it comes to its pupils driving themselves to school. So can we spend a minute or two talking about that? And Jamie, I suppose what I want to ask you first is, how can schools manage the risks associated with pupils driving themselves to school, particularly in relation to carrying passengers and the distraction that they might bring?
Yeah, so we were asking the government to consider GDL, which sort of brings in certain constraints on young drivers that we know are sort of high risk. So driving at night, driving with friends, and things like that. and the government has sort of said no, they're going to think of something else. But it's like, well, actually, schools, it's their property. They don't have to let people drive onto their school property, so they can have controls. And this particular school had a policy, and I was just thinking, actually, I hadn't even thought about this. I don't think my school has. They haven't sort of mentioned it to us. But actually, it's a great way to at least flag those risks. So what I would love to see is actually the school taking an interest in, well, if you're going to drive to school, then I'm a fan of black boxes, because a black box, the driver's being monitored for speed, for sort of cornering and stuff like that. So it's encouraging better behavior, whereas you can pay more money and get a policy that doesn't track you, shall we say, and therefore you could drive how you like. So I think actually, this policy didn't go that far, but I'm thinking this is a brilliant opportunity that we could put advice in there to schools to say things like, well, okay, you can, but you can only do it if you've got this type of insurance. Okay, you can take friends, but actually you have to have done an online safety module, and your friends also have to understand the risks of being in there, and actually knowing that actually it's important that they understand the risks, and their behaviors can impact on the driver, that can get, they should be the ones being sensible to say to the driver, no, don't talk to me, you watch the road, sort of thing. And I think so it's an area that I hadn't even thought about until about 3 weeks ago, but now it's sort of firing ideas in my head that actually schools and colleges could actually have a really big impact on the safety of young drivers by sort of saying, well, actually these are the risks, this is what you should be aware of. You can only come and drive to school if you've done this sort of thing, or you've got this insurance, or and those sort of things. So I think there's a bit of work to actually sort of thinking, well, what would be a really good standard or a really good example of that, and then how do we get it out to all those schools and encourage them to pick it up, and that could also include how they park, sort of thing. So like I say, if I went to a construction site and I didn't park backwards, you get told off, which is a bit strange. But if I go to my kids' school, it's a bit of a free-for-all, and then everyone's trying to get in and out, and it's busy, and there's kids walking around all over the place, and I'm just like, do you know what, we probably need a better policy, and actually thinking about how people park and move their cars, and where the kids go, and all these kind of things. So yeah, it's an untapped area. I don't think there's necessarily many deaths or serious injuries within schools, but I don't know, I don't know who's collecting that data. Would it be reportable to the health and safety executive? Because are the kids working? Is it a work environment? Does it cover by that? So yeah,
are they
I think
commuting? Is it Rob, you know everything about that kind of thing. What's your take on young people driving themselves to school? Is that a commuter journey? Do they need?
No, it's not. It's just social, domestic, and pleasure. They're not commuting because they're not getting paid to go to school. It's not a work. It's something that's really difficult to enforce, isn't it? How you enforce that, I don't know. I think my son is 17, drives to college, but he finds it cheaper to go on the bus by the time he pays for parking and everything else. The public service bus is actually cheaper. But going back to the buses, I think as this webinar needs to distinguish is there's a big distinction between school buses taking the kids to school and buses then taking our kids on trips. They're two very different journeys, and I think the learning point there is the one that is the trip to school is controlled by the council. The council put out tenders. They've got control checks in place and things like that. Whereas the school then can pick any company they like based on cost, and then just hire that company to take the kids to the local zoo or something like that. So we need to be careful that they're two very different journeys. So
definitely.
Bus journeys to school are more older drivers, retired part-time, because it's only a couple of hours in the morning and a couple of hours in the evening, and some of them don't even come under domestic rules because they're driving less than 4 hours, and because it's a bus they don't even need to keep records of driving. that kind of thing. Whereas the school bus trip to the zoo is all controlled by tachograph, so the driver's got to have a break and everything else, you know. So you've really got to separate the two journeys from each other, because they are really different. Obviously, the legalities about having the school bus signs front and rear, things like that, you know. And then, for example, when we talk about private schools, you know, we're going on to the licenses. If they're charitable trust, they're registered charities or private schools, then they can drive D1 not for profit. But if they lose their charity status, then it's D1 and they need the full D1. So it is a minefield, and yeah, you just need to be careful that they're two distinct journeys.
Thanks, Rob. Geraint, I think it's probably quite important that we just hear from you. With your FORS hat on, what would a school, what would a minibus or a coach need to have and to have done to it to be part of your scheme? What are the kind of standards that you're looking for?
Well, the FORS standard covers a broad range of compliance and safety requirements, and also addresses sustainability. So, for example, the FORS Bronze standard, it's open to all vehicles, but it covers the core pillars of compliance. So how vehicles are managed in terms of the transport manager as required, vehicle maintenance, making sure that vehicles are having their periodic inspections, annual testing, and so forth, tachograph calibrations as applicable, and then daily walk-around checks or first use checks, even things as simplistic as insurances, VD, vehicle loading, and driving as well. And training is a core part of FORS, and at a management level, we've got the FORS practitioner modules. We've got 16 very, very good practitioner modules. A transport manager CPC qualification is just a qualification. It doesn't equip a transport manager for the big wide world that's out there. So this is where the FORS practitioner modules come in. We've got the FORS driver training as well, that's safe driving, so that's very good, and that equips drivers, and that brings me on to the drivers area of FORS as well. We see many of the incidents we've talked about, a lot of them are pilot error, and driver training is a key part of FORS, as is driver licensing, making sure we made much of D1 licensing and D licensing. You know, to drive a bendy bus, you've got to have a D+E, which I happen to have. But, you know, it's making sure people have the right licenses, that they are fit and able. Driver fitness and health, for example, is a key part of FORS. And going back to the training, you've almost got to be type trained on a bus or a coach now these days. You know, if I drove a triaxle Setra, it's very different to an Ariza i6, you know, because they're completely different vehicles. You remember doing rail replacement once, and the driver couldn't open the side lockers on this Ariza because they're not from a button inside the cab. So very different things there. And then you come FORS then deals with operational safety and a lot of other things. So FORS is an overarching standard. It covers a lot of things, and it did. You know, yes, I'm biased towards FORS now, but as an operator, I could see the benefits of it, albeit a freight operator, and it gave me the courage in my convictions and almost like a comfort blanket. And it was a thank God I've got, rather than I wish I had, if and when things went wrong, because I was running well north of 100 vehicles as well. And that translates back into the world of buses and coaches. And the point I made earlier about that ski trip, and I do make that distinction. You know, it's like it was a tour operator that the school had brought in to do that with that coach. But if there was a FORS sticker on it, I would have been much happier. And you see some of the things that go on around here on a daily basis. You know, I think if there was a better standard, yes, we got the O licensing structure as the bare minimum for vehicles in scope of O licensing, but to go a cut above that and to be compliant and more, and really an exemplar operator, this is where FORS comes in.
Oh, thank you very much, Geraint. May I go to Brian, because we've mentioned volunteers during the course of the webinar. So what are the specific kind of considerations when it comes to volunteers driving school vehicles and the training that they may need?
So by the nature, volunteers are giving up their time freely to get involved in the delivery of the driving of doing some of the school runs. So typically, as I said, the numbers that we're working with through this particular organisation, they've got 750 vehicles, they've got 3,000 people on their books as a volunteer. So volunteers will be driving, they're going to be doing 1, 2, maybe 3 journeys a week, either to or from school, depending on the roster. Because they're volunteers, it's not so easy to mandate any kind of driver training that they might consider too onerous. So, expecting them to go through sort of lengthy online risk assessments and modules and that is going to put a lot of them off. So the approach that we took with this particular organization was, once we'd confidently established that their particular needs would not be satisfied through our usual route of and suite of products, we then tailored and built specific e-learning and online modules for them around a set of parameters that we agreed between us. So we kept them short. They're video-based modules. They're only a couple of minutes long each time. They focus on a particular subject that organization wants us to concentrate on. And we build it in a way to try and make the content as memorable as possible. So each time someone watches it, there's something in there that they'll take away, that they'll remember. For example, when we did a module on alcohol consumption, knowing that these people that volunteer are of a reasonably good educational standard, we didn't have to go into sort of chapter and verse around alcohol by volume for particular drinks, and you can have some of this but a bit more of that one and things like that. We just said, look, the score, so the best option really, and you know that alcohol will impair your capabilities, so the best option is have none for the road. So that was the little sort of takeaway phrase that we sort of put in there, so that becomes the memorable thing. And the feedback very much was people saying, I like that, have none for the road, easy to remember, obvious, and absolutely the right, the safest thing to do is have none for the road. Yes, we know there are certain limits of alcohol in the bloodstream and all that, but it's easy just to say, look, if I don't drink at all, then I know I'm good.
Thank you very much, Brian. Rob, you have a PowerPoint that you give to students or young people who are on coach journeys. Basically, the message is behave yourself. Let's be a little bit more. Let's go into some detail. And how do you make an impact to try and ensure that the passenger behaviour on school journeys is as safe as it can be?
Yeah, I think we all blame the drivers and the bus companies, but equally the children's behaviour influences how the drivers behaving as well. Obviously, you've got a really badly behaved bunch of kids on the bus. He's going to be more focused on thinking, is my bus getting damaged? Am I able to control the kids, rather than focusing on the job in hand in driving the bus in a straight line. So their behaviour is quite important. So the Welsh Government have actually got a child behaviour code of conduct. And if I can just share my screen with you guys, we go around the schools. And
can you do that? I don't need to do anything, do I?
I'm trying to do it as we speak now. So we go around the schools and remind the kids of their obligation as well. So just bear with me. So the idea is we try and alter the kids' behaviour at a very early age. So the main one is not wearing seatbelts, but also just behaviour in general as well. And from a road safety point of view, I've been looking and doing some research on it, and there's not a lot out there that assists us in educating the children. So it's something that we really need to look at, because if we get these kids at a very early age, then it should stop them misbehaving when they go to when they get in high school, because that's probably more where they're going to misbehave. Just bear with me, it's taking a while to load.
That's all right. Well, you keep trying that. And there's something I
Yep.
just want to put to Jamie, if I may. PACT covers not just road transport, but other transport as well. I'm just thinking about what the road sector more generally could do more of in terms of perhaps dealing with the data that's available from near misses or, you know, incidents that didn't happen. And can you reflect on that for us?
Well, I think that there is a whole issue with learning from near misses and collisions and even, you know, learning from deaths and stuff. You know, if it happens on a rail, there's a proper investigation. There's a rail safety investigation branch. Yeah, so I think we need a road one. I was talking to someone saying there's something happening, I think, around buses, where if there's a bus collision, there tends to be a bit of a review and sort of sharing of information. But I don't know if that happens for minibuses. And I think it's one of those things where if we're not sharing, you know, it'd be great if schools shared this. But actually, you know, minibuses are used for lots of different reasons. And actually making sure that we're learning from other people's near misses and collisions and stuff, I think is really powerful, because it's yeah, hopefully it sort of raises someone's alarm bells that actually, oh yes, actually I might have had a near miss. Perhaps we need to do something about that. So at the moment, there's not like I don't think there's a national database that you can put stuff in. I think Mark Cartwright from National Highways is trying to put something together where, and I don't know if it just covers the street road network or not, but you know, the idea is that people can share near misses and learning from those. So actually, you know, if something goes wrong, ideally nothing bad happens, but yeah, it's still a kind of it could have done. So yes, I think it's really important that something nationally is set up so that we can share those.
Yeah, so this is the Welsh Government school behaviour. Basically, it's so simple, it's common sense. So we just we hold assemblies with the schools. So we just say, obviously, when the bus arrives, wait for it to stop. Reminder to put their seatbelts on. Obviously, making sure they put their bags, don't be rude to the driver. You can all see this, yeah?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's an accident on the bus, you know, obviously the driver's in charge if it is an accident, and he's in charge of the safety. And then we got a small little video at the end there. So it's very basic, but it just written, all of this content is the actual Welsh Government, comes from Welsh Government, this one does. So there's schools have got their own policies, but that's the behaviour policy from Welsh Government there. So we just brief the schools. So we tend to start at year 6, because all the little ones tend to behave themselves. It's when they get to comprehensive school where the chewing gum gets stuck to the seats and the behaviour starts getting an issue. We're thinking of maybe doing spot checks with some of the schools as road safety officers, maybe turn up at a school, just jump on and remind some of these kids they need to wear their seatbelts as well. And we do road safety lessons with the young ones, and we explain to them that it's probably safer to put a seatbelt on in a bus than it is a car, because you've got so much room inside a bus to be tumbling around. If the bus, for example, was to turn over and you've got all that glass, you're going to fly out of the window because there's so much glass there. There's big holes in the window. As with a car, it's not wearing a seatbelt on a bus than it is a car, and most of the kids do get that. So from our point of view as road safety, it's something we need to push a lot more than we're doing probably at the moment.
Oh, thank you, Rob. I just want to go back to Brian and just talk about this idea of, you know, interpreting data. So, you know, when there are near misses, what we can do, and just talk to me about retraining and what you can do for the drivers who have identified as needing additional training or retraining.
I think in the case of near miss, if we're, you know, going down that sort of the avenue of saying that, you know, a near miss, or, you know, could it be classed as an incident, as I suppose to review the specifics of what happened that led up to the near miss itself, and see what can be done, or what perhaps could have been done, or what decisions could have been made, and what action could have been taken to have avoided the near miss in the first place. You know, quite often we find, and it's a sort of a culture within driving in general, that if you say to somebody, oh, you had a bit of a near miss there, their first reaction will be, oh yeah, but it wasn't my fault because you know, the other person did something a bit unexpected. So in reviewing it, in saying, look, this isn't about apportioning blame, this isn't about finding out who was at fault, this is about finding out, could we have actually avoided this in the first place? You know, because on this occasion it was a near miss, so okay, there was no contact, there's been no injuries, great, but what about the next time? What about the next time? You know, there's only a matter of time, if we don't correct it sooner rather than later, that there is going to be a collision, and there is potentially going to be incidents, you know, injuries or worse. So reviewing what happened and actually encouraging, it goes back to that behavioral change that I mentioned earlier, that if you can actually get people to follow a thought process that's looking at safety first, regardless of who may or may not be at fault, regardless of how other road users might be behaving, but if they, you know, because as an individual, we can't influence or impact anyone else's behavior, we can only influence our own. So if we can take our own, you know, decision making from the point of view of keeping ourselves and our passengers as safe as possible, then we've done everything we can to actually reduce the chances of an incident near miss in the first place.
Geraint, is there anything you'd want to add to that?
Yeah, leading on from that, in terms of collision investigation, FORS has got a very good FORS practitioner accident investigation module, and I used to look after all the incidents at John Raymond Transport, and yes, I know they're freight vehicles and not buses or coaches or anything like that, but when you're looking at trend analysis, even heat maps as to where incidents occurred, and near misses, this what we were talking about earlier on is culture, having that open culture and taking the drivers on that journey with you, and having a culture whereby drivers feel that they're able to freely report incidents and report near misses, because you know, we've got the accident triangle, or the incident triangle, and for every near miss you're going to have a you know, so for so many near misses, you're going to have at some point a fatality, and for people to understand that and to articulate that, and I used to articulate that and communicate that with the drivers, and yeah, I saw my incidents drop by having that cultural change and having that training that we delivered, and yeah, managing the information, and even looking at it at a granular level. We made, I think it was you, Brian, was saying about older drivers, and when you look at drivers and the aging demographic amongst drivers, particularly school drivers, school bus transport, when you look at the older demographic, you know, are they having more collisions than, say, somebody in their 30s or 40s, for example? So just looking at it, what the causational factors, yeah, it's very interesting.
I'm going to stick with you, if I may, Geraint, because the next question, we've probably not got time for more than a couple. I'd like to talk about bad weather and policies that need to be put in place. I mean, for example, school's going to close because it's snowing, or you know, adverse weather, and how that is affecting fleets and school fleets generally. So just any thoughts to reflect on that, please?
Inclement weather, again, it has to be risk-based. There's operators around here that simply will not take, irrespective of who's asking them or telling them, they just won't take the coach off the yard. And that operator's probably about a mile from where I'm sitting now. So there has to be a risk-based approach to it. And you know, who makes that call is important as well. But ultimately, it's in the operator's gift to decide whether to fly or not.
And anything that you might wish to add to that, Brian? Because if you have, I don't know, but volunteer drivers may be less willing to drive in inclement weather, more less so perhaps than those who are professional? I don't know. I'm just guessing.
I mean, again, for the organisation we're working with, the decisions on, safety to drive are made at, they have a structure of management that would make those decisions for them. So from the driver's perspective, the decision to drive or not to drive in this case was probably made long before it gets down to being one that they've got to make. If that makes sense, so they if the weather has got to the point where it's bad enough that driving is just not safe, then that's already been decided for them. In other cases, we have delivered the modules that again talks about moderating behavior to fit the prevailing conditions. So understanding that in wet weather, your braking distances now have become considerably longer, and your visibility is worse, and so there's a whole different approach required for driving a vehicle when the weather is inclement. But yeah, if it becomes serious enough not to drive, then that decision is probably already made for them. But if it does come down to the driver, then making sure there is the culture, going back to what Geraint has said many times, the culture within the organization that the driver feels safe to be able to say, this is not appropriate to drive in these conditions. And I don't think it's right, that the driver doesn't feel like they're putting their position at risk by saying they don't want to drive because of the weather conditions.
Thank you very much, Brian. Michael Higgins has just popped in some details into the chat. A National Highways free guide to incident investigation. Also the Driving for Better Business driver roadworthiness guide. Let's just ask Rob, please, if you would, just to give us your kind of 2-minute walk round check for a daily check that any driver of a minibus or for anyone involved with school transport, what's the minimum that should be done, and what should we be looking out for?
Yeah, well, clearly these drivers need, obviously, tyres is the big one. That's what keeps the bus on the road, isn't it? Making sure they got the correct tread depths, first of all. Then all the lighting, indicators, has warning lights, brake lights, reversing lights. Reversing lights are important with kids. Yeah, we teach them from a very early age. The white light at the back of the car is the most dangerous light if kids are walking behind buses, that kind of thing. So drivers need to check that they're on as well. I understand a lot of the buses have an audible warning as well. Then obviously inside, we need to check that all the seatbelts are working correctly. So clipping them all in, checking them, make sure that all the kids can use their seatbelts, they're not frayed, and they're all in good condition. A lot of buses got an emergency door at the back. Yeah, the buzzer will go off at the front to inform the driver that the kids have opened the back door, or there's an emergency and they can use the back door. So making sure it does actually open, and obviously just check the audible warning light as well. And then fire extinguishers and first aid kits as well, making sure fire extinguishers are in date. Yeah, they've correct pressures on them, and making sure, again, first aid kits are not just fully stocked, but the stuff that's inside first aid kits is actually not expired as well, because a lot of bandages will have expiry dates on them and things like that. So very basic checks, making sure that the seats are all screwed to the floor, they're not loose, that kind of thing. So and any other damage that is that is in the bus as well. So them are the basic things. You wouldn't expect the drivers to start going underneath, checking suspensions, steering racks and things like that. That's down to their 6 weekly checks, but certainly they're the basic ones that the average driver can check themselves.
Rob, thank you very much. Paul Strong passes this comment. We now have training for summer and winter weather conditions, but also have a safety first policy. So if a driver feels it's unsafe, we allow the driver to make the decision instead of feeling they have to drive. It makes a real difference and looks after our staff. We're coming to the end of this webinar, so I have one more question, which I'm sure all four of our panelists will be willing to provide an answer. The question is this: what one thing would you put forward in promoting safer, greener and more efficient school transport across the UK? One contribution that you'd like to make. So let's start with Jamie Hassel. What would you like to contribute to that? One thing.
I think it could be bringing in the star rating for buses and minibuses. Just and if it covers the green side as well, sort of thing. So at the moment they've just brought it in for lorries, but we haven't got it yet for buses, so I'd like to see that.
Okay, a
As in
star
NCAP,
rating.
is it?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll see what we can do. Thank you very much, Jamie. Let's go to Brian Watts. What's your would your contribution
I think
be
from
to
our point of
that?
view, the being able to provide the sort of the right training and support for those people who are going to be designated as drivers. So, you know, if they've not necessarily got volunteer drivers, if it's people drawn from among the school staff, that they have access to, you know, training material that's going to help them drive the bus in a way that is going to be, you know, suitable from a safety and environmental perspective. You know, a lot of our practical training does deliver that, and you know, we worked in the past with the Energy Savings Trust, for example, to show how vehicles can be used from cars all the way up. Vehicles can be driven in a way that is going to be kinder on sort of fuel use, on maintenance costs, and so on and so forth. So all of those things can roll up to start providing you know, great improvements in how the vehicle's used, which ultimately is going to be sort of useful from a good green perspective.
Thank you, Brian. Rob Griffiths. Well, I think you're on mute, Rob.
So,
oh, there we are.
yeah, no, I'm having trouble with my internet connection. I missed some of your question. If you can repeat it, if you don't mind.
Just, yeah, very briefly, what one thing would you contribute or put forward to promote safer, greener or more efficient school transport?
I think the big thing for us from a road safety point of view is promoting the behaviour of the kids to allow the drivers to get on with their job, so that the drivers can be spending all of their time concentrating on driving safely, on driving more efficiently. So from our point of view as road safety officers, I think we need to step up and reinforce behaviour and reinforce safety that the children need to take some responsibility as well, and just remind the schools as well that in the kids about seat belts, behaviour, getting on the bus efficiently, quickly, not messing about, from that kind of thing, and it'll allow the driver to just get on with his job.
Thanks, Rob. I'm sorry about your the dodgy internet connection, but I think we got most of that. Lastly, then, Geraint, would you like to share one thing with us before we close?
For me, there isn't one panacea. However, I have to hang my hat on an overarching and holistic accreditation scheme that covers everything.
That sounds good to me. Thank you very much indeed. I'm just going to share my screen because I can go to the next screen. I hope you're all seeing that. Because that's all we've got time for today. I hope you found it interesting and thought-provoking. My thanks to Geraint Davis from FORS, Rob Griffiths from Powys County Council, Jamie Hassel from PACT, and Brian Watts from DriveTech for their expert input and patience in answering all those questions. Before you go, do make a note in your diary to join us at 11 o'clock on Tuesday, the 17th of June for a webinar, Blue Light Aware, Staying Safe When Seconds Count. And that's brought to us with GEM Motoring Assist, who funded the Blue Light Aware video resource. But that's it for today. So I'm very grateful to the guest. Thank you for tuning in and sharing your comments and questions in our chat. Hope you found it useful, and hopefully we'll see you on our next webinar. So from me, James Luckhurst, it's goodbye.